Peas on Moss is brought to you by Kimberly Schaub, a culinary scientist turned business developer. Over the past 4 years, the audience has downloaded episodes over 40,000 times, and we have 1,500 impressions across the website and a host of social media platforms. Will you consider contributing to the show to help keep it on air? Donations through Patreon help to offset the cost of web hosting, editing, and producing the various Peas on Moss offerings, from podcast episodes to videos, and every little bit helps. From corporate advertisement to sponsored content and private contributions. Reach out to me on peasonmoss.com for details. Hello, Peas on Moss listeners. Welcome to summer. We're digging into saying no and still keeping your job with Mark Crowell. I'm your host, Kimberly Schaub, a former R&D chef product developer, now in business development. We dive into food industry topics from technology to the nitty-gritty of business on this show, and I've asked Mark Crowell, the founder of CuliNex, to break down some of the challenges and opportunities he faces in his food product development consultancy. In this clip in our conversation, we're talking about setting baseline expectations with clients, and he starts to share why it's important to have a clear understanding of the objective before even starting. Along the way, we talk about how you can and should push back against a request, whether from a client or a supervisor, at least to the point of letting the requester know what some of the risks and potential outcomes could be. It's a great, wisdom-filled quick bite from the considerable experience of Mark Crowell. Let's take a listen.
At the end of the day, we're talking specifications and documentation, but this cost information is an integral part of the project documentation.
It does seem that you can't really talk specifications or really success in a project without thinking cost and volume, and committing to what the scope of the project is before you even start to really hit the bench.
And you would be surprised at how many clients are like, well, we don't know. And, it's sometimes it's a conversation of, well, until you know, or until you are willing to commit, it really doesn't make sense for us to engage in the project with you, because it could very well lead to disappointment. We certainly don't want to disappoint you after you've spent tens of thousands of dollars with us, that it's too expensive for me to make this product. We'd rather save you that heartache and maintain our reputation.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because one of the, I think, big challenges in working with a client, and I know that many of us in product development roles have taken on single, side hustle opportunities in the past. I think the challenge is figuring out how to say no appropriately and in a very data-driven or facts-driven sense. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Talk to me about how you can approach a no potentially with a client without it also being no, take a hike, or how do you talk about it in a way that you keep the door open? You, like you said, you maintain your reputation. But that encourages the client to return if their opportunity is a little bit more drilled down later.
Oh, that's a great question. And I always found it to be particularly more challenging when I was an employee or running an R&D department. Some senior executive would say, well, we need this done yesterday, or, or you have to be able to figure out how to get an extra month of shelf life out of this product, or some sort of thing like that. And the best way I can tell you to have that conversation, particularly if you're in an organization as an employee doing R&D, is to present it as a risk analysis. So you present the pros and the cons, and you, rather than saying, no, that simply can't be done, just say, offer up a risk analysis. If we speed up the project, it'll increase the risk by, for these reasons. Or if we put this requirement on the project, it will do this. to the risk profile, or if we, have these volumes, then it may reduce the pool of co-mans by this much. So it's really offering up information and alternatives and asking for choices to be made. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's never necessarily just a flat no. It's an analysis of what are the factors that are bearing on the risks, and what you're always trying to do is reduce the inherent risks in a project.
Yeah, that is a really great, very kind of teaching and collaborative focused approach for how to tackle a very big question, because then you're not being accused of being uncooperative necessarily. You're putting the trust or responsibility in the client or the higher up who's saying, do this. You're putting this back on at a higher pay grade to say, well, then you're committing to this level of risk if we do take this on.
Well, you're also showing the depth of your knowledge of what levers can be pulled on to get a result. So you're not only putting the decision back on the decision maker, but you're also demonstrating that you understand the decisions they can make that will influence the chances that you'll be successful in the development project.
I think that's a really fantastic lesson from this, because I know that product developers can get accused of just refusing to think creatively. And this is a great way for encouraging creative thinking and showing interest and capability for taking on a new project, but keeping it very focused on, are we as an organization willing to take on these risks, and do we really understand what we're taking on?
That's right. And the rubric that I find so helpful is you can have it good or fast or cheap, but you can't have more than 2 out of 3 of those.
That was good, cheap, or fast, right?
Yep. Good, cheap, or fast. So quality, cost, and speed. And you can generally get 2 out of 3, but if your expectation is that you're going to have all 3, you can probably guarantee that you're not going to get a triple play. You're going to fail somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get 2 out of 3, you're doing really good. And of course, if you're just aiming for 1 out of 3, you really should be able to accomplish that. So if you think about each of the potential no's that you're going to have to give, you really can sort of think of it in terms of, well, what is being asked for here? Am I being asked for 1 of these things, 2 of these things, or all 3 of these things? And you can judge for yourself how reasonable the request is. And you can pass that information along.
Wow, that is so fantastic. And I would say, for developers of all levels, whether you're brand new and are kind of on the receiving end of all orders and requests, or if you're mid-level, I really appreciate how you talked about if you were to lead an organization internally in an R&D group, these are the ways that you would have emphasized, resource usage and having an idea of how to push back in the right sort of way. Because you're right, as a consultant, you could just come back to say, well, this is out of scope. If we pursue this, it'll be 30 more hours at XYZ rate. So here's what your impact could be. That'd be the easiest, possibly the least bedside manner friendly version. But to your point earlier, it's easier to track consultants' hours than internal hours, because I personally haven't the discipline to track my resource spend in 15-minute increments.
Very few internal R&D roles require really any sort of tracking of time and time allocation by project. And companies don't have a really good sense of what their internal development process actually costs the company, much to the detriment of R&D functions right across the industry. One of the reasons there are so many R&D people available to us when we go to recruit, unfortunately, is because they are often laid off. I think at higher rates than maybe other professionals are laid off from large food companies. And it's somewhat unfair that they are often first in line to get their pink slips, because companies really don't have not only an idea of what the time costs, but also they don't really have a clear idea of the ROI. No one's trying to keep track of the revenue side of the equation or the profitability side of the equation from their R&D departments. That is a sort of discipline that the business person in me really believes would go a long way to stabilizing the ranks of R&D departments within larger companies.
Any observations or suggestions for those who are listening who might want to try add that awareness and discipline to their functions?
Well, it really comes down to something like that is generally not in the control of the R&D department, although they could perhaps implement some kind of a cost tracking. But generally speaking, time and cost tracking is not something that is done in non-manufacturing environments. It's very much done in manufacturing environments. The cost of labor that inputs to each unit produced. But we don't think about professional services that way unless you're in a law firm or, an architectural firm or something like that. Then it is very much kept track of. Or if you're a consulting firm doing product development like we are. If you could convince your company to create some sort of or approve some sort of a time tracking software for the work that's done, and also convince your finance department or your category management folks to keep track of the return on investment on new product development that you do, you would have a formula for measuring what you are accomplishing as an R&D department or as an R&D individual. That'd be pretty darn powerful. Most of our clients have no idea. I'd say all of them have no idea what their internal R&D costs. So when we tell them what it costs or what it's going to cost to do a project with us, they really don't have an internal to external services comparison.
Thanks for joining the Peas on Moss Quick Bite. I hope you've been enjoying them. I'm pivoting the podcast content frequency to monthly episodes soon, and I'm bringing you clips of interviews and conversations we're having over at the Research Chefs Association Hustlers Under 40 Young Professionals Network Group. I'm bringing guest speakers to drop their knowledge, as well as asking members to step up and share their insights and experiences. We spend our monthly gathering in real talk about careers, work challenges, and possible solutions, technical questions, and strategies that members can start activating. While the focus of the group is on the first decade of a professional's career, the group is open to everyone under the age of 140. We'd love to have you join us for any or all of the gatherings. Go to peasonmoss.com and sign up for the newsletter. So where does this leave the podcast? Well, I'll be airing clips of the Hustlers interviews here for everyone to hear. The podcast is also reducing publication to monthly as I work to make room for working on my MBA. As always, the podcast costs are carried primarily by me and a few generous Patreon sponsors, as well as by Saltblade, an artisan cured meat maker in Seattle. I'm always open to additional sponsorship and advertisement, so if you like this content and want to see more of it, please let me know by sponsoring the podcast and helping me offset some of the ongoing publication costs. Thank you for being a steady listener of the Peas on Moss podcast. If you'd like to share the love, pop on over to the website, peasonmoss.com, and buy a sticker and advertise us on your water bottle, coffee cup, or laptop. Thanks!